The air felt electric that night in Kinshasa, not just from the humidity that clung to every surface, but from the history that had just unfolded before 20 million eyes worldwide. I never told anyone what I saw in that locker room. For 50 years, I kept these memories locked away closer than my own heartbeat. My name is Marcus Jefferson, and I was 26 years old when I witnessed the most intimate moment between two titans of boxing. I was just a nobody, an assistant to one of Ali's trainers, but that night I became the invisible witness to something that would change how I viewed strength forever. 8 rounds. That's all it took for Muhammad Ali to shock the world again. Nobody believed he could defeat the younger, stronger George Foreman. Nobody except Ali himself. I remember the exact moment Foreman hit the canvas. The collective gasp that sucked the oxygen from Kinshasa's night air. But what happened after the cameras stopped rolling, after the reporters filed their stories, after the world had decided they knew everything about that historic night? That's what I'm finally ready to reveal. The corridor leading to the locker rooms was chaos, shouting, cameras flashing, security pushing back the surge of bodies desperate to touch greatness. I slipped through it all like a ghost, knowing the back passages of the stadium better than most. I had one job: deliver a message to Angelo Dundee, Ali's trainer. I never expected to become the keeper of the most human moment between two boxing legends. "Hey, you can't be in here!" someone shouted as I ducked into what I thought was our team's preparation room. But I'd made a wrong turn in the pandemonium. Instead of Ali's jubilant team, I found myself frozen in the doorway of George Foreman's locker room. The fallen champion sat alone, still in his boxing shorts, head bowed so low his chin touched his massive chest. No trainers, no reporters, no entourage, just a mountain of a man crumbled. Before I continue, if you're watching on TV or your phone, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching my videos from. I want to know how far they're reaching. Thanks. I should have backed away. Should have closed the door. But something kept me rooted there, the rare sight of vulnerability in a man who'd been portrayed as indestructible. Foreman didn't look up, didn't acknowledge my presence. The swelling had already started around his eyes, a cut above his brow still weeping blood that he didn't bother to wipe away. His breathing came heavy, labored, like each inhale cost him something precious. Then the door behind me opened again. I pressed myself against the wall, certain I was about to be thrown out or worse, but it wasn't security or Foreman's handlers. It was Muhammad Ali himself. Still taped up, his body glistening with sweat and triumph, the new heavyweight champion of the world stood in the doorway, eyes fixed on his defeated opponent. For 30 agonizing seconds, neither man spoke, neither man moved. The only sound was the distant roar of the crowd still celebrating in the Kinshasa night, oblivious to this moment unfolding in the bowels of the stadium. I held my breath, invisible in the corner, witnessing what no camera would ever capture. "You're still George Foreman," Ali finally said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Not the boisterous showman, not the poetic provocateur, just a fighter addressing another fighter. Foreman looked up slowly, his eyes finding Ali's. There was no hatred there, no bitterness, just raw, unfiltered exhaustion. "How'd you know?" Foreman asked, his deep voice barely above a whisper. "How'd you know I was punched out after the 5th? Ali moved into the room then, taking a seat on the bench opposite Foreman. He unwrapped the tape from his left hand methodically, like he was buying time to find the right words. "Because I've been there," Ali replied. "Nigeria, 1963. Henry Cooper had me seeing 3 rings and 6 gloves, but they didn't know. The cameras don't see inside you." Foreman nodded slowly, understanding passing between them like an invisible current. "They're saying you let me punch myself out, that it was your plan all along." A small smile tugged at Ali's lips. "And what if it was? Would that make you feel better or worse, George?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. I pressed deeper into my corner, afraid even my breathing might disrupt this raw exchange between two men who, just 30 minutes ago, had been trying to dismantle each other for the world's entertainment. "I don't know yet," Foreman admitted. Then, after a pause that stretched like eternity, "They won't let me be just a man, will they? After this?" The question wasn't really for Ali. It was for the universe, for whatever cruel gods orchestrate the rise and fall of greatness. But Ali answered anyway. "No," he said simply, "they never do. You win, you're a god. You lose, you're nothing. But both are lies." Something shifted then, a tectonic movement beneath the surface of their shared understanding. Foreman's massive shoulders straightened slightly, his chin lifting a fraction of an inch. "I underestimated you," Foreman said, no bitterness in the admission. "Not your boxing. I underestimated who you are." Ali finished, unwrapping his hand, and stood, crossing the small space between them. What happened next still gives me chills 50 years later. The greatest, most controversial boxer of all time knelt down in front of his vanquished opponent and took Foreman's massive hands in his own. "Listen to me, George," Ali said, his voice urgent now, intense. "Tonight they think they saw the whole story. They think they know what happened. But they only saw what happened in that ring. They didn't see what it took to get there. They didn't see the doubt, the fear, the prayers." He squeezed Foreman's hands. "And they sure as hell won't see what happens next." "What does happen next?" Foreman asked, vulnerability naked in his voice. "That's the beauty of it," Ali replied. "You decide. Not Don King, not the press, not the crowds, not even me. You." A commotion erupted in the hallway, voices, footsteps, the reality of the world crashing back toward them. Our bubble of suspended time was about to burst. Ali stood quickly, stepping back. "They're coming for you now," he said. "The vultures. They'll want to pick over what happened, make you explain it. You don't owe them that." Foreman nodded, something resolute hardening in his expression. "Muhammad," he said, stopping Ali, who had turned toward the door. "Why did you come here?" Ali paused, his back to Foreman. When he turned, there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before, a quiet wisdom that transcended championships and fame. "Because 20 years ago, nobody came to me," he said simply. Then he was gone, slipping out a side door just as Foreman's entourage burst in. I followed Ali like a shadow, unseen, my heart pounding with the significance of what I'd witnessed. It wasn't until we were halfway down the corridor that Ali stopped abruptly, turning to face me. "You saw all that?" he asked, no accusation in his voice. I nodded, unable to speak. "Some things aren't for the world to see," Ali said. "Some things are just between men." I understood it as the request it was. For 50 years I honored it. But now, with both men gone from this world, I think the truth of that night deserves to be known. Not to diminish their legacies, but to enhance them. To show that beneath the bravado and the punches and the poetry, there was something profoundly human. What nobody knew was that moment in the locker room wasn't the end of their interaction that night. 3 hours later, after the press conferences and the celebrations, after Kinshasa had begun to quiet from its fever pitch of excitement, I found myself delivering fight statistics to Ali's hotel suite. I knocked but received no answer. The door was slightly ajar. I should have called out, should have made my presence known, but something made me push the door open silently. There, in the dimly lit suite, sat Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. Between them on the coffee table was a chessboard. Neither spoke as they contemplated their moves. Two warriors, engaged in a different kind of battle altogether. Ali noticed me first, raising a finger to his lips. I nodded, left the papers on a side table, and backed out of the room. As I pulled the door closed, I heard Foreman's deep voice. "Checkmate in 3, he said. Ali's laughter, gentle and genuine, followed me down the hallway. But there's more to this story, something darker, something I've never shared until now, something that explains why these two men formed a bond that night that would last, in different forms, for decades to come. The night before the fight, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Don King, the fight's promoter, was speaking with someone in hushed tones in a service corridor of the Intercontinental Hotel. I was delivering hand wraps and paused when I recognized his distinctive voice. "I don't care what it takes," King was saying. "If Foreman loses this fight, we lose everything. Make sure he understands what's at stake." The other voice was lower, harder to make out. "And if he doesn't play ball? Then remind him about his family back home," King replied. "Accidents happen every day." I froze, ice flooding my veins. Was I hearing what I thought I was hearing? A threat against Foreman's family if he lost the fight. I slipped away before they could discover me, my mind racing. Should I tell someone? Who would believe me over Don King, the man who had brought this historic fight to Africa? I said nothing. I convinced myself I had misunderstood, that it was just tough talk, boxing hyperbole. But the morning after the fight, when I saw Ali and Foreman in that hotel room, I realized Ali knew. Somehow, he knew what was happening behind the scenes. 2 weeks after returning to America, I received a package. Inside was a chess piece, a black knight, and a note in Ali's unmistakable handwriting. "Some fights happen outside the ring. Keep this between us." I never spoke to Ali about it again. But years later, in 1987, I ran into Foreman at an exhibition event in Philadelphia. He was in the midst of his comeback, older and somehow gentler than the scowling destroyer I remembered from Zaire. When he saw me, recognition flashed in his eyes. "Marcus Jefferson," he said, surprising me that he remembered my name. "Ali's shadow." We found a quiet corner away from the crowds. Foreman studied me for a long moment before speaking. "You know, don't you?" he asked. "About what King did?" I nodded, relief flooding through me at finally being able to acknowledge it with someone who knew the truth. "Ali came to warn me," Foreman explained. "That night, in the locker room, he'd heard rumors, had people in King's circle. He knew my family was being threatened if I won." He shook his head, still incredulous after all these years. "My opponent was the one who came to tell me my life was in danger." "But you've never said anything," I responded. "All these years." Foreman's expression was complicated, part resignation, part pride. What would be the point? To admit I was scared? To taint the greatest night in Ali's career with that kind of darkness? He shook his head. "Besides, Ali helped me get my family out that night. Had them on a plane before King even knew what was happening." I struggled to process this revelation. So, in the locker room, he was making sure I was okay, Foreman confirmed. Making sure I understood it wasn't my fault. That sometimes survival is more important than winning. His eyes grew distant. He told me to take the loss, to live to fight another day. Said the world would give me another chance if I was patient. And he was right. George Foreman would eventually reclaim the heavyweight title 20 years later at the age of 45, completing one of the greatest comeback stories in sports history. "Ali never told anyone about this?" I asked. Foreman shook his head. That's who he was. Behind all the talk, behind the greatest, he was a man who understood that some victories aren't meant for the public. Some battles you fight quietly. As I sit here now, both men gone from this world, I finally understand why this story needs to be told. Not to diminish their legacies, but to enhance them. To show that beneath the bravado and the punches and the poetry, there existed a code of honor that transcended sport. That night in Kinshasa, I didn't just witness the aftermath of a historic boxing match. I witnessed true greatness, not measured in championships or knockouts, but in humanity. The story doesn't end there. In 2001, long after both men had retired, I attended a charity event in Louisville, Kentucky. Ali was there, his body already betraying him with Parkinson's, his movements slow and deliberate. Foreman was there too, jovial and rotund, so different from the fearsome fighter he had once been. During a quiet moment, I watched them from across the room. They sat together, no words exchanged. None were needed. Ali's trembling hand reached out, and Foreman took it in his own massive palm, just for a moment, just long enough for me to see that the bond forged in that locker room in Kinshasa had never broken. What happened in that locker room after the rumble in the jungle wasn't just a moment between two fighters. It was a lesson in what strength really means, what courage actually looks like, not in the ability to knock a man down, but in the willingness to reach out to him afterward. Not in conquering, but in connecting. I've kept this story to myself for 50 years. I kept it through Ali's decline, through Foreman's resurrection as the smiling pitchman for grills, through the mythologizing of that night in Africa. I kept it because some truths aren't meant for consumption, aren't meant to be headlines or sound bites. But now, as an old man looking back on a life filled with remarkable moments, I realize that some stories need to be told precisely because they remind us of our humanity. They remind us that even our heroes, especially our heroes, are flesh and blood, capable of fear and compassion and understanding that transcends their public personas. What really happened in that locker room after Muhammad Ali defeated George Foreman? Grace happened, respect happened, humanity happened, and perhaps just maybe that's even more impressive than the fight itself. If you made it this far and felt every word, don't leave without subscribing and commenting where you're watching from. If this truly touched you, return the favor. Comment, subscribe, join this family with me until the next video.